and welcome to the shed. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to sharpen a router blade. Hope you enjoy. So when it comes to sharpening the iron on a router plane, there's a few things we need to look out for. We want to ensure that the blade stays parallel to the surface or square to the surface of the plane. Now if it doesn't, then you're going to end up taking uneven cuts with the blade, and I'll show you in a minute, because this one is out slightly, so I will show you what's going on here in a minute. And what you're going to end up doing is doing little ridge marks when you run your plane across, because it's canted like that, so you're digging in one side more than the other, just like you would with a plane blade that's not parallel or square to the sole. When we take a close look at the plane iron, we can see that the corner just here visually is ever so slightly higher than this side here, which at first glance would make you think that this is not square to the rest of the blade. However, if you put a square on it, it actually is. That doesn't matter. We don't need the blade to be square right across. That doesn't really affect the use of a router plane. Now visually, yes, it'd be great if it was nice and square across, but functionally that doesn't matter so much. What we want to do is make sure that that is square, so it's going to cut across the blade fully when we actually push it through the wood. So I'll show you that in a minute to see if we've got an issue here with this particular blade. So we need this to cut evenly across in reference or coplanar with the sole of the router plane. So let's jump over here to the vise where I'm going to put a piece of wood in, and we'll see if we actually need to work on that, if that's going to be a problem for us. So to do this, you want a nice flat piece of timber. This is just a piece of plywood and it's dead flat on the surface. Now what you want to do is retract the blade up into the sole, so when it comes down the blade's not touching at all, as you can see right here. So now what we want to do is lower this blade until it's just skimming the surface. And what that's going to do is make sure that the high point of this hits first. So we can hear that slight sound. It's taking a little bit of something, but not enough to actually see it. Just a little deeper, just a tiny amount. So it looks like we've taken more off on the left side than we did on the right. Now when I showed you this before, we can clearly see that this side is high and not this side over here. What that's telling me is that this is not parallel with the sole and this side is dipping. So on the bottom here we've got it twisted like that slightly. So to exaggerate it, the blade is tipped like that in reference to the sole. So what we need to do is correct this little high point to make that flat across parallel to the sole. So in order to do that, we obviously need to reference our plane down on a flat surface that's abrasive, so that we can lightly remove that material until we get a nice flat reference across the very tip of that blade to get it to work properly. When it comes to the way these blades work, that it's not quite a flat 90 degree across here, because it has a little relief edge. So this edge at the back here on the heel of it is higher up than the actual cutting edge, and that's to give it a relief so it'll actually take a cut when it's coming through the wood. Otherwise it'll jam up and not take a cut properly. So that's why we're only working with the very tip here and not the whole thing. Before we get started, we're going to want to protect the sole of the router plane, because we don't really want to be abrading that, because it's assumed that this is already flat, and in my case I did flatten it a while ago when I first got it. The blade is back in and we've got it pulled up, so it's not making any cut here at all. So what are we going to do to protect the sole here? Well, this is a pretty simple process. We just want to protect it from a tiny bit of abrasion. So a little bit of painter's tape across the bottom here will solve that problem for us. Don't need a whole lot, and we don't necessarily have to cover everything. A little tiny gap there. What it's going to do is just set it up the thickness of the tape. so we don't damage anything. And so now what I want to do is actually just remove this tape out of the center here. And now we can see that we're pretty much protecting the sole from a little bit of abrasion here. You can just whack the few scraps here if you wish. So now we're going to protect the majority of it. What we do is we're going to come in onto the diamond stone like so. Now, you could reference it that way, but you're going to get a better referencing if you go long ways across it. So you're getting a much better reference of your router plane to your stone. So what you want to be doing is checking down here where the blade is. So you can see we've got a little gap down here where the blade makes contact with the stone. So what we want to do is slowly move that down, little tiny turns until it makes contact. And we can just do a little tiny movement like that each time. So if you can hear that, it's making a slight drag, which means it's just connecting. And I know it's not the easiest to see. I'm trying to get the light to shine off it for you, so you can see right here on the cutting edge that we've now got a shaved line right through that's almost completely even all the way through, which means that we've practically counteracted the issue that we had there by doing this. So we can still see that it's ever so slightly higher on this side, so we can correct the last little bit of that when we flatten the back of this. But otherwise, it's only going to be a slight little push, probably on the first stone to counteract that, or it's out so little I think I'll only do that last little bit of counteraction on the very last stone if it's required. But it is showing that this is fairly square, even and parallel to the sole, because it wasn't out much in the first place. So now what we want to do is drop that blade out of our router plane, and we want to set up our sharpening stones to start flattening this. Now, I wasn't sure if you could see that little reference, but you can definitely see it here now, just there. You can see how that slightly shiny bit right on the very tip of there, how that is made it. So we've done that on the stone. So for this, I'm going to use my diamond stones. It's equivalent of about a 400, a 600 to 800 and a 1200. So any stones you're using, I'm just going to use diamond stones for this because it's quick and easy. And just going to spritz them so we can concentrate on this. Now, because this came out slightly out on this side, I'm just going to give it a little bit of extra referencing on that side as I sharpen it. Now, not a lot of pressure is actually required to do this. The hard thing is just holding on to this to actually get it to stay referenced down. So you can actually hold it up on the top like this and then push down on it and turn it sideways if you need to. And obviously keep that additional pressure on the high side that you need it to. So we're going to wait until that shiny piece is gone. That's what we're trying to get to disappear off the edge of this. So that line's looking nice and square now, so what I'm going to do is just keep referencing flat, and I'm just putting the weight down in the middle of it. The hardest part of doing this is actually keeping this completely on contact, so you want this to be completely flat. You can see we're slowly working on that shiny part. There's still a little bit left, so now I'm going to move on to my next grit. And now I'm going to go on to the fine. I'm convinced that this is flat and now it'll be coplanar with the sole of the router plane. But if you can see there is still a little bit of that referencing that we did there left there. So now we're going to move on to the bevel, and we're going to sharpen the bevel, and that will remove that last little bit, and then we should get two square planes together here. This is why I don't like to use a file for this, because quite often these blades are hardened, and this one in my record is hardened, and you can't use a file on the hardened surface. You can hear that it's not cutting, it's just skimming the surface, which means we can't use a standard mill file to do that, and you would have to use a bit of abrasive on a piece of wood, or the little diamond paddles. That would work too. There's another approach that you can use. If you actually have a diamond plate, you can actually use this as a file like this. Now, I wouldn't recommend this usually, but if you're struggling with finger strength to actually sharpen it face down, this is actually another option. So you use your coarse stone like a file. And what you're looking to do is just flatten this bevel out. So you're just trying to keep this as flat as you can, so you get a nice flat reference for sharpening on your stones afterwards. And because these are diamonds, you don't have to just go in one direction. You can just find the right spot and go back and forwards like this. So I think I've referenced that about right, and I've actually got a little burr on the back here now. So now to work on that bevel, I'm going to bring my little jig in here so I can elevate this during the sharpening process, so this bit doesn't get in the way. You want it up high. Now if you've got a dirty diamond stone like mine, just make sure you give it a quick clean before you do this. Now you can do this on any stone. The diamond stones are a little bit better because you're running it in one spot, so you're not going to gouge it out. So that's why I like to use the diamond stones for this. But if you've only got water stones or oil stones, you can do the same process. You might just have to flatten your stones a few times during it. So we wet it slightly, we come in and we rock up until we hit the cutting edge. Once we've got that referenced, we lock our elbows in. Go back and forwards about 10 times. Feel for a burr, which we have. So now we can move on to the next stone, which is my 600 to 800 equivalent. Remove the burr. Reference again. Feel for the burr. We have a burr. Down onto the 1200 equivalent stone. Once again, come in, remove the burr. Just work this one for the burr. There's a very, very feather burr there. And just back and forwards a couple of times just to ensure that burr is removed. So now it's got to the stage here, we're going to go to the strop like we usually would and just finish that off. Normally you would see me have the strop down in the vise, but I'm just going to hold it here so we can get this referencing here of the bevel, just like with the stone. So we're going to start just by doing about 10-20 strops on the back. Quite honestly, you can go for as many strops as you want here. See that that's quite shiny now. And now we want to turn it over to the bevel, do the same. And then one. It doesn't look like it's the most even, but these bevels are a little bit difficult to actually work, especially these hardened ones that you can't use a file on, so just do the best you can. But I know that I've got it angled to the edge, so we've got a nice square even cutting edge here. So now we've got our blade back in here. We want it just above the surface like we did before. So now we've got this just above the surface. We want to do that, turn it a quarter of a turn. And the first contact we made here has actually hit completely even now, which is exactly what we wanted. We're no longer hitting one side before the other. Let's get just a random piece of pine that I know is relatively square. Just a piece of scrap in this case. And you can see we just took a very square shaving there. I can let it up just a little bit. And it's taking super fine shaving right the way across. So there you have it, folks. That's how you sharpen the blade but also prepare it so it's square and going to do what you want it to do. And it's vital that we get this step correct, because it's just going to cause you a lot of problems in the long run with your router plane and wanting to use it and actually getting it to work properly if it's not coplanar with the sole and parallel. But it's also important to remember that your blade doesn't actually need to be square across. It just needs to be that coplanar with the sole. And as long as it's sharp and it's doing that coplanar job and engaging at the same rate, it's going to do the job that you want it to do. So if you like the video that you saw here today, please consider liking and subscribing down below. It really does help the channel out more than you know. And don't forget to comment your thoughts on the video. And if you'd like to support me a little bit further, please consider giving a super thanks to the video if you got some value out of it, or checking me out on Patreon, and that link's in the description below. And if you'd like to see another sharpening video like the one you saw here today, please consider checking out the video up here where I show you how to sharpen a plane blade. Bye for now.